to Doru Costea. Actually, Doru Costea is a career diplomat and served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania for a long time, and mostly tasked in Middle Eastern countries. But the most significant mission of him was that he was the president of the United Nations Human Rights Council. So, sir, the floor is yours and the panel is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Aslan. It's an honor always to be in your company and the company of the most able colleagues at the SETA Center. Allow me also to pass a very respectful greeting to all the members of the panel and to the audience. A very good afternoon to you all. Our topic, the topic of this panel brings me to some remarks at the beginning. And let me start with a brief reminder of how the first decades of this millennium started and ended, more or less. The first decade, the millennium bug, a scare that hardly materialized, yet had a certain impact on people. Then a 9/11 happened, and the world's security has never been the same. By the end of the decade, the economic crisis was raging in ways that made many remember the Great Depression almost a century ago, and yet it was not so. The second decade, in retrospect, the Arab Spring at the beginning of that decade seems now to have heralded developments that had been quite unthinkable before. And the pace of events quickened. Roughly every 2 years in that decade, the world was jolted from one consequential happening to the next. 2014, Russia annexed Crimea. 2016, US saw a less than conventional new administration in the White House, and the EU shrank for the first time in its history. At the end of the decade, we lived the start of a crisis that has yet to come to an end, even if we talk about the post-pandemic age. And here we are at the beginning of a third decade, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, another crisis that is ongoing towards an end that is unsure, difficult to predict, and probably will occur rather later than sooner. And uncertainty is the characteristic of that end, and even more so for the day after. Now, what these events have in common is that all of them continued or raised challenges to security, some of them old, while others were quite new. However, while the essence of these challenges, the essence of these challenges share is their relationship to security in its widest meaning. And this is what makes them differ one from another is primarily the actors that are involved, state and non-state players. And yet, their actions are more often than not intertwined. Hence, another challenge emerges because the bottom line is where the critical responsibility for citizens and societal security is. It is the state that is the depository of this responsibility. And then we must remember that everything happens against the background of the all-encompassing fourth industrial revolution, although this industrial adjective is a conventional term, since the impact of the said revolution is hardly limited to industries. Quite the contrary, I'd say. Technical breakthroughs have been used first in the military domain ever since the ancestors of man attached a sharpened rock to a stick And so the spear was born, or the battle axe, or the arrows. Now unmanned aerial vehicles are joined by unmanned underwater drones. War itself is turning into the hyper war, along with the hybrid war and the cyber war. And the list is longer than I would care to mention it right now. Last but definitely not least, the so-called unconventional or non-traditional challenges to security, like the climate change, the unintended consequences of the information revolution, persistent social gaps, and so on. This category of challenges seems to gradually lose their novelty and unconventional nature. One reason may be that finding viable solutions takes too long a time, which transforms the challenges into familiar realities of our everyday life. Therefore, one needs to think out of the box because of the obvious truth that new problems cannot be settled by old solutions, even if they proved to be efficient ones. All these developments are fueling the need to review concepts and practices in international law and its enforcement, among many other things. Now, the organizers have invited a most competent and learned group of personalities that are going to share with us their thoughts on a variety of topics, from a global perspective to these challenges, up to the specifics of drone warfare and the proxy wars. Before starting actually the conversation, allow me a kind reminder. 10 minutes are granted to each of our distinguished speakers, and questions or comments are more than welcome on the chat function, and I promise to relay them to our guests. However, do keep in mind that we have 1 hour only for this conversation. And now let's turn to our first speaker, Monsieur Dominique David, advisor to the executive chairman, IFRI, editor-in-chief of Politique, étrangère, a co-director of RAMSES in France. He will tell us things about actors and strategies, a new world, a French view in this regard. Mr. David, you have the floor, sir. Well, it looks like Monsieur David is not with us.
Actually, he's with us, sir. He's with us.
Okay.
But I think experiencing a technical problem, now he's down.
All right, never mind.
Yeah.
We'll turn to him in order not to lose time. I will kindly ask our next speaker on our schedule, and that's Ambassador Dr. Andreas Reinicke. Welcome back to our conversation, Ambassador. We are all ears to listen to your ideas on the repercussions of the pandemic in the global system, geopolitics, and bloc dynamics. Doctor, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And there are obviously lots of things to say concerning these issues, particularly as we were speaking on the post-pandemic world. So I thought I will start to see what is the post-pandemic world and what exactly it may be and what exactly may be the consequences. The consequences are very large. So let me identify what I am seeing as political and geopolitical consequences of the pandemic with which we have to deal. And I would like to start with Europe, because the pandemic in Europe had two very interesting moves. The first was the almost reflex of the states and also the populations to close down the borders. So to avoid that virus travels. We could see this in Germany, a country with 8 borders, that suddenly the borders were close to France, to Denmark, Denmark closer to Germany, Italy and France closed their borders. So the opposite of the spirit of the European Union, where, you know, the Schengen area, we want to have a free flow of people. And the same with goods. Suddenly, the masks, the medical masks were scarce, so they were not delivered to other countries. This was the first reflex. And it was quite dangerous, actually, because it was so contradictory to what the essence of the European Union is. But then in the second phase, I would say, after a few days, which I think, as we know in international politics, is very fast, the leaders realized the danger of this. So they were sitting together in Brussels and trying to see how to overcome these situations. Now we realized that we need to stop certain movements, which we did worldwide. So the borders were a natural way of doing it, but still the negotiations, how to open it and how to become more flexible were there. The products were delivered internationally within Europe very fast. And even the people who were sick and suffered from COVID, if the hospitals were full, were transported to Germany, took some from Italy and from France. And when it was still not so much in my country, then when we had a big problem, Italians took some Germans. And on the borderlines, people just went to the closest hospital on whichever side of the border it was. So I think this was then the new area which we learned during the pandemic, including also that the production of vaccines, and also the fact that we need to buy vaccines European-wide, was unified in Brussels, which was not the case before. And I dare to say, without this experience, which I have just described within the European Union, the fast discussions and fast decisions now in the Ukraine crisis may not have been possible, because in the European Union we realized the danger of if we do not stick together. So I think we made it better this time. The second issue is that we are suddenly realized also the danger of the worldwide supply chains. Again, it was known a little bit before, but remember the masks. Suddenly we realized that all the medical masks were produced I think in Indonesia or Malaysia, I don't recall exactly where, 3 major companies producing medical masks were. So we realized that we may have a problem, and as when suddenly the Suez Canal was blocked because of the ship, we realized what influence this has. So I think for the first time, due to the pandemic, we realized the negative sides of the supply chain. But if I say we, I think we should say the general public. I think those who were responsible knew it before, but the general public suddenly realized that this is an issue which we need to confront. And again, now with the Ukraine war, we see it even more clearer. But it was the pandemic which really exposed this issue, I would say, for the first time to a greater public. The third issue is that we realized there was a conflict or a competition of the political systems. I dare to say that we had 3 different approaches. One was the approach, I would say, was Trump and Bolsonaro in the United States and in Brazil say, just let it go. It doesn't exist. It's just exaggerated. We know the result. The other example, I would say, we have seen in China, with absolutely lockdowns, as we're witnessing again now. And I would say that these lockdowns, in their brutality, where people are actually literally closed in their apartments and they have no chance to get out, and with some apparently dramatic results, is more than just locking them in. It is a question which I think some of those people will ask themselves, well, is that really the system which we want? Everything is subject to avoid the spread of the virus. In Europe, I think we have had a middle way. Whether it was always successful, yes or no, I cannot say. That everybody has to judge. But I think we managed to try to find a balance between a lockdown, if necessary, but also a freedom of movement and freedom for the people of living on the other side. Not everybody was happy because some people say it was too little, others said it was too much. But I think this is always an argument that we want not too bad. But we realized in the system that we have three different systems. I personally must say, in the end, the European way is quite a successful one, but that is up to everybody else to judge. My fourth point is that we're also realizing, maybe even more in Europe than which we have seen in Turkey or in Pakistan, to what extent the relationship with your countries have to be set on a different level. And I think this is particularly developed on the basis of the question, who gets vaccines? And now from the health point of view, we all knew that everybody needed to be vaccinated. We also knew that not everybody could not be vaccinated, but how to resolve this issue. This was a painful discussion in my country, and I don't think this discussion is over yet. I think it has only started. Now the question is, should we open the patents to everybody? Should we facilitate the production of these goods in other countries? These are the various options. But I think the issue that health is a global good and that we need global answers has become much more apparent. And I think much more decision makers and also the general public are aware of the situation. Again, these are, you could certainly identify more issues as those I have just mentioned, but I think the pandemic told us and told the decision makers and general public that we have suddenly new issues and that we have to regard certain things under a new concept and in a new way. The answers to this and how to look at them and what to do is still open. But I think we also now in the academic world and people who are discussing on possible decisions have to analyze this. We are now back, as far as the Ukraine-Russia is concerned, to the old classical war. But this doesn't mean that the answers to the new challenges, just as pandemics or climate change for that matter, are not there yet. So we have to learn from all of those. That is my contribution, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Doctor. It was thought-provoking, and I jolted at least one question as of now, but stand by, it will come when we get nearer to the end of our conversation. I wonder whether Monsieur David has joined us. I haven't seen him on my screen. Okay, Monsieur Sohert.
Yes.
Oh, so you are
No, sir.
I'm not participant. I'm just participant.
All right, yeah. Never mind. Okay, so we'll move on then to waiting for Mr. David. However, we'll move on to the next our next speaker, who will bring us a little bit closer to a rather concrete aspect of our discussion. And I mean Associate Professor Dr. Ahmet Keser, who is with Hasan Yongsu University. And he is an expert in political science and international relations at Keser, Turkey. He will tell us things about asymmetry asymmetric warfare in the historical progress of recent conflicts in multi-layered and multilateral structure, which is quite an exciting topic. So, Professor, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Can you please authorize me to share screen? Murat?
Well, I think our colleagues will take care of that.
Yeah.
Sure. Ibrahim, can you please authorize Professor Ahmet? I can't see my authorization. Ibrahim?
Sorry, I can't understand. Sure.
Authorize him, please.
Ibrahim, can you please authorize me to share my screen?
Ibrahim, you authorized Professor Ahmet Cevat Acar, but you should authorize Ahmet Keser. The same name, but different surnames.
Okay. Not to lose any time, let me start, and when they authorize, we can share at least.
No, you are authorized. You are authorized.
Okay, then. So I think you can see the slides now. We will talk about the changing and structure of the conflicts, starting from Afghanistan to Syria to Libya and to Ukraine, how the transformation is realized within this perspective. So the aim of the presentation is to investigate the changing nature of the conflicts from this chain and to look deeply into this multi-layered and multilateral new structure. So the study will contribute, I think, by adding new terminology to the security content in the global perspective. So when we start, of course, when the conflict started in Afghanistan, the nature of the conflicts were in an asymmetric structure, which means that small groups can have an impact on conventional larger groups higher than their normal capability by using guerrilla or other irregular tactics. So when it comes to Iraq and Syrian condition, we have witnessed that the situation has changed dramatically, and it became more than an asymmetric structure after Syrian conflict. So we have seen that different powers were included in the conflicts in Syrian context, from global to the local, even to the terrorist organizations or some sectarian groups, not even like any proxies. So from very local units to the global powers were involved in that arena, including terrorist groups like PKK and ISIL as well. So within this environment, the global powers preferred not to go into the direct conflict with each other, and instead they preferred to use proxies to fight their war in the Syrian arena. So a different version is now ongoing in Ukraine. One side is directly involved, and the other parties and global part and the Western countries are also not involved directly, but Russia is involved already. So in Syria, Russia has given and still giving support to regime, Assad regime, while the USA supports PKK, PID against ISIL. On the other hand, both global powers conduct operations against ISIL, while USA was in coalition with some Western countries, including Turkey. The dilemma here is that PKK, PID is defined as a terrorist organization by Turkey, while they are separately evaluated by the USA. And PKK is categorized within the terrorist groups, while PID is evaluated as a political entity. So Besides this, while there is a good economic relationship between Russia and Turkey, they have different approaches regarding the Assad regime. As in the case of Libya, when the conflicts ongoing on the ground in Syria are investigated, it is possible to see a telescoped structure, which can be determined as below. So it is a multi-layered one. In the outside, there is the external first layer. This is the surface layer. And in that layer, there is a covert power collision, covered, not open. So it is a struggle among the global powers of the world, which constitutes the external layer. And there is a signs of cold conflict in that external surface. Then under first layer, within and under, just at the intersection points, another semi-covered power collision and conflict goes on among some of the global powers and some of the regional powers, both within and under the first layer. I will come to a graphic. Of course, it is a matrix graphic afterwards. Then under this first layer, an intersection part, there is the second layer, which reflects both the signs of an internal conflict and proxy conflict. So there is an explicit hot conflict takes place between the regime forces and the opposition forces, supported by other parts, some of them by Turkey, the USA, and others simultaneously. So which has, if not global, at least regional impacts, this second layer. And also, this layer affects the migration issues, and migration and immigrants turned out to be new types of weapon in this new warfare. This uncontrolled mass human accumulation affected almost all the demographic structure of the countries. So then comes the third layer, which consists of the different sub-layers in itself. In the third layer itself, there are other sub-layers like economic spaces conflict, ethnic-based conflict, and sectarian conflicts ongoing in Syria. So the third and most internal layer at the center, that is the last but not least, there are some additional power clashes and cold conflicts between some parts of the opposition forces and the regional administrations of the neighboring states. For example, the struggle between the northern Iraq regional administration and the Kurdish groups in Syria affiliated to PKK terrorist organization can be evaluated within this frame. So the above-mentioned multi-layered structure of the conflicts in Syria and Iraq has converted the previous asymmetric warfare into a more chaotic and matrix structure as a supra-asymmetric one, which is named as asymmetric warfare in this study. So this graph explains all those layers. In the outside, the first layer, external layer, and there is a covert conflict between the global powers A, B, and C. And also you can see there is a covert conflict similar to the Cold War. They are not directly in conflict with each other using the proxies, but also there are intra-layer conflict with regional powers and global powers as well between the layers, between the first layer and the second layer. And then in the second layer, we see the regional powers like Turkey, Iran, Jordan, which are affecting and being affected by the conflicts in Syria. And then under that one, we see the local powers like regime forces, opposition forces, ICL and other terrorist groups. And at the center, we see all conflict within the opposition forces and local groups themselves as well. So four-layered conflict, but this has also a matrix structure. The conflicts does not just go within the layers, also they go on intra-layer sector as well. So after the given snapshot of the multi-layered conflicts in Syria and Iraq, which includes a kind of covert international macro-scale proxy conflict, explicit mesoscale conflict among the major internal actors, explicit mesoscale inter-layer conflicts among the actors of different layers, and microscale intra-layer sub-conflicts in each layer. So it is a very confusing matrix structure, a chaotic environment. The recent formation of the war and conflicts in the multipolar global order can be stated as hybrid war composed of matryoshka conflicts, which is named after as an asymmetric warfare in this study. So the given nature of the conflicts in Iraq and Syria can be adapted to other existing or possible conflicts elsewhere during the multipolar global era, as in the case of Ukraine. This asymmetric structure also brings an incubator potential to the regional conflicts. So this means that each micro but asymmetric conflict may have a potential of global diffusion as well. For example, the multinational participation in radical terrorist organizations creates a nesting environment for the global spread of conflicts upon the return of their members to their home countries. Or the war in Ukraine has a potential to diffuse to all Europe and our globe rapidly if it cannot be prevented or if the nuclear weapons are used. So this is only a presumption, not proved yet, but there is one certain thing, that multipolar and multi-layered structure of the conflicts has already added new factors to the warfare. Within the frame of the evolvement towards a multipolar world order, we may indicate at least 5 new factors as new weapons, which carry out the potential of changing the nature of war. The integration of unmanned aircrafts, unmanned submarines, and unmanned marine and land robots to the warfare, cyber war, media activities, migration, economic means, and natural resources as natural gas. So there is something certain that UAVs and other unmanned marine or land robots have been used intensively in the conflicts successfully and are already being used as the primary tools and or primary maneuver units. So related to the second factor, which is cyber war, it can be asserted that there is no requirement for reciprocity. This factor seems as if it doesn't have a direct fatal or injurious effect on the hostile party at the first glance, but because of its indirect impacts, it can cause serious results if used for attacking on the air traffic control and or health systems of the adversary side. So when the third factor, media, is investigated, it is possible to assert that the real-time communication devices, such as the cell phones or other devices, functioning through the internet and social media have changed the path of the media activities. For example, in Ukraine, Russian forces could not sustain their regular communication with usual military means and relied on cell phones, which bring its disadvantages as well. So the conventional military communication system based on the top-down order transfer and from down to top reporting system through the HQs and the bureaucratic process was beaten by this direct and fast mechanism. So the fourth, the migration, and the fifth factors like economic means and natural resources as natural gas are taking their places rapidly among the weapons or tools of the warfare. Migration is threatening the sustainable socio-cultural environment and demographic structure of nation states by the fleeing and accumulation of human masses from east to west and from south to east. All the previous paradigm related to border control, economic security of the states, and even the approach to fundamental rights as the right to live and freedom of movement is going to a transformation. So economic resources such as natural gas is now being used as the weapons of this new asymmetric type war, as did by Russia towards the European countries, including Bulgaria and Poland. So as these developments and the chaotic nature of the multipolar system itself coerce the leaders, decision and or policymakers to seek new mechanisms to handle the difficulties which they have not met before. The above developments did not change only the nature of the conventional war or conflicts, but the characteristics of peace negotiations, internal and international politics, and diplomacy as well. So, to conclude, of course, that is why the humanity and policymakers need to develop new tools which will be able to handle the challenges of new type asymmetric warfare, because we see that the conventional means which we get used to are not capable of solving the current problems of the global security. So that concludes my presentation, depending on the questions, of course. Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Perhaps one of the ideas that we can take from your very exciting presentation is that we actually are talking about a sort of a whole of society conflict at the end of the day. And personally, I liked very much the asymmetrics matrix thing. Thank you very much indeed. But these conflicts, however, do take place in our world among players, among global players or not so global players. There are actors and strategies. And Monsieur David, welcome to our conversation. And let me invite you to take the floor and share with us the French view of the new world.
Thank you very much, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is it normal?
Yes, sir. Go on.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your invitation and the possibility given to me to make just a few general points from a French point of view, not the French point of view, of course, on the emergence of this new international system and the place of various conflicts in this new system. First, I would like to remind you, even if it's a commonplace, that we have been living in our Western countries, after all, I'm still French, in a great illusion. We have been living in this illusion since 3 decades, the beginning of the 90s, the illusion of progressive democratization of the entire world, of an irrepressible opening of the societies, of the efficiency of international interventions, and the extension of the rule of law. And we see that this illusion was based on some major elements. First, the faith that agreement between great powers will limit international crisis or allow efficient common policy interventions. The idea that economic openness will create political openness. I mean democratization with a growing role, extending role for civil societies, non-governmental organizations, etc. And the hope that the institutions, both at regional or global level, will organize some sort of global governance of globalization, and especially for emerging global problems. In brief, this was the idea that the Western way of life, way of thinking, Western ideology, Western references could organize the world. And that dimension of what we called at that time human security would at last prevail on the classic dimensions of interstate competition. This has been, globally speaking, the dominant feeling of the 90s. And in this logic, states were remaining central, but with a growing role, supposed, for civil societies. Of course, we have not tremendous changes since the beginning of this century. With a lot of changes, you know, first the discovery of new vulnerabilities for those developed and Western countries, especially with the 9/11 events in the United States, the Chinese emergence, which changed the balance between powers and obliged to the new definition of the hierarchy of powers in the world. The general failure of Western interventions outside, from Iraq to Afghanistan, the global failure of Western governments from Balkans to Arab Spring, I mean Western political governments, and the emergence of new challenges for security and governments, of course, climate change, health problems. Even before COVID, health security concerns were not discovered only with the COVID pandemics, and the role of technologies with an ill-governed development all over the world. All these elements have shown, of course, that the dominant Western vision of world governments had failed. It's what we call, in some part of the world, the de-Westernization of the world. This de-Westernization of the world demonstrates shows to us that the vision of security inherited of the 90s was over. And then we are confronted to two recent crises, which oblige us to a new step of thought to analyze the evolution of the world. Of course, the COVID crisis and the Ukraine war. Two short remarks concerning any type of international crisis. When important things are at stake, questions are always directed to states, not to civil societies, not to NGO, not to international organizations. The states take the hand, as we say. That was the case in 2008 for the economic crisis. That was the case for 2020 to 2020 with the COVID crisis, etc. The second preliminary remark is that facing a crisis, states first react unilaterally, and second, they cooperate. The best example is, of course, for the Europeans, the Euro crisis at the beginning of last decade, and the COVID crisis more recently. More precisely, the COVID crisis, to me, gives us at least three great lessons. First, globalization creates dependence for all states. And so there is a good face of globalization and a rather negative face of globalization. Second, international cooperation is necessary for basic sanitary security. Cooperation within the EU, cooperation within the UN system with COVAX for the vaccination, etc. Point three, all geopolitics, nevertheless, remain true. The geography of vaccination, despite all UN efforts, despite all UN proclamations, remains geopolitically organized. If you see the geography of vaccination, you see that it's following the great impetus of the geopolitical divisions. Second, Ukraine, not crisis, but war, of course, with, to me, at least five interesting points. First, it's naive to say that, but we have to repeat it. Military force still counts, still weighs. Second, conventional conflicts, and it's a great surprise for us Europeans, conventional conflicts are still possible even in Europe, which is supposed to be the most rational and the most sub-militarized space in the world. Point three, importance of information technology and the intervention of civil societies within this technology. I allude there to the intervention of some American firms, of course, and of the mobilization of public opinion, for example, in Ukraine. Point 4 or 5, I can't remember, the weight of propaganda, of course, from states or out of states, directly from civil societies. And last but not least, what we call now the weaponization of economy. The Western maneuver has shown something very interesting. That is what we were supposed to describe since decades as universal means of managing globalization. For example, the Swiss system. We showed very rapidly that they could be used as weapons against our adversaries. Well, of course, it's normal. We use the means we have, but I think that this lesson will not be forgotten by other actors all over the world. And this is absolutely important. Last point, probably, which perspectives for our conception of global security after those crises and for the rural states as providers and consumers of security. First, it's likely that we will assist to the constitution or to the reconstitution of a new strategic landscape with a new concentration of powers. Western countries, I repeat, have shown that economic instruments of globalization could be used as weapons, and other important powers or medium powers will try to escape to this Western-ruled organization of the world, to this Western-ruled globalization, with two possibilities. The first, a sort of a fragmented globalization, each empire, each new empire following its own rule, in its own sphere of influence. Second hypothesis, a globalization separated but with some sort of cooperation articulated between those various zones of influence. But please notice, add to this uncertainty that the crisis in Ukraine did not create a pro-Western solidarity all over the world. See the votations in the UN organization at different levels. And so it's probably, it's probable that the constitution of a Western bloc around the United States with the NATO and arms and the growing unity between the US and European states probably will create opposition all over the world, in other places of the world, I mean. With probably, and I will conclude on that, 4 consequences at least. First, in this new concentration of power, the military will have a new weight, either because new empires will oppose each other, or because of absence of a global regulation, the opportunity will be open for medium powers to impose their will regionally, as it's already clear for some states which are regional powers. Unfortunately, point 2, it will take probably time to set up new rules and a new law order corresponding to this new shape of power. Global organization, I mean, for example, UN, will have to be reformed or will remain impotent. And everyone knows that the reform is quasi impossible. It's dubious that disarmament negotiations could rapidly succeed. And personally, I think that Ukrainian crisis could boost, on the contrary, the temptation of proliferation for nuclear armaments. The Ukraine war showed clearly that the only caveat, the only serious caveat against unlimited escalation was the presence of nuclear armaments. I think that this will be not ignored by other actors. 3, regional organization will depend, will remain possible, of course, but will depend widely on the interventions and the conceptions of new empires, and especially, for example, in Europe, that raises a problem of the relations between European Union and the US, especially in Europe and in Africa. 4 point and last point, Mr. Chairman, civil societies will or could keep a role for producing security, of course. But I think that they will add their contribution in the conception generally organized by states, even on the transversal challenge that are global health, climate change, or control of technologies. I'm sorry to say that this description seems to be a temptation, I should say, of going back to future. Yes, it is. We are going back to a system, at least transitory, I think, in which state power concentration will have the lead. It's very sad, but I think this is the most credible perspective. The remnant hope is that interdependence in trade and in exchanges of technologies could limit the fragmentation, the rising fragmentation of this international system, and maybe allow a global cooperative governments. But probably this will not be possible and so brilliant at the short term, in the short term. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci à vous. Thank you indeed. That was a very intriguing and thought-provoking set of remarks. And thank you again very much for them. And here we come to the last but not least set of remarks. And I have the pleasure of introducing to you the Colonel Dr. Hasan YÜKSELEN, an expert in strategy and Turkish foreign policy, whose expertise is both on the field. He has a field experience in Bosnia with U4, in Afghanistan with ISAF, and in Qatar with Operation Inherent Resolve. And you would remember that I mentioned that our remarks, our guests would cover a wide range of topics, from global aspects to very concrete things. And this is what the Colonel Hasan YÜKSELEN will talk about drone warfare and proxy warfare. Colonel, shoot.
Thank you, Ambassador, and dear guests, distinguished panelists, and the audience. I will try to address how the drone warfare, are they effective enough to mitigate the impacts of proxy warfare? And we will utilize some concepts, of course. We are just started to make this research with my colleague, Assistant Professor Merve Seren. And I should also be thankful for his introduction, insightful introduction, and about the changing character of war to Associate Professor Ahmet Keser, because he made an excellent introduction, which will shorten my presentation, in my opinion, because I will not delve into details of the conflicts, but just introduce how the drone warfare somehow limited or curbed the impacts of proxy warfare. All we observed, our case studies is focusing on Syria and Libya case. In the Syrian case, we have observed the expansion of, let me talk first of all the concepts. One of them is territorialization and deterritorialization. The other one, escalation and de-escalation. The third one is legitimization and delegitimization, and the fourth one is the securitization and desecuritization. Of course, especially for the territorialization and securitization, we are not referring to critical security studies or critical geopolitics. We are just using these words, reverting the process to the backwards. How the non-state actors territorialized and how by using the force they deterritorialized, or how security issues, especially the instability, insecurities they have created, has been contained or degraded in time. Let me directly jump into the Syrian case. In the Syrian case, we observed the expansion of the terrorist organizations, namely the ISIL, Daesh, and the PKK-YPG, which one of them actually territorialized and rapidly expanded both to Iraqi and the Syrian territories, and to declare some sort of caliphate. But at the end of the day, by using the YPG PKK as a proxy and by supporting it with conventional air force, the Daesh was degraded. And for the time being, it has been deterritorialized, and what they have claimed has been reverted. And because of how this issue is securitized, the state actors perceived both Daesh, the insecurity they have created for regionally, for the nation states, for regional states, and the transfer or the export of threats to the neighboring countries or even to the global scale, caused the states to securitize this issue, and they started to apply some extra measures by trying to degrade them by using use of force. And of course, they were illegitimate. They were declared illegitimate, and what they have done was illegitimate. There is no disagreement on that. Even though for the PKK YPG issue, the connection between the two was mostly neglected or not comprehended acknowledged in a solidarity way. But it has changed, especially for Turkey, to change the strategic calculus and to intervene with the drones. And the drone warfare, both for the Daesh case in Syria, because of the IFRI Shield operation, and against the PKK YPG with other operations, they have somehow degraded and deterritorialized. But the outcome of this process is partial solution, but their instability or the threats, the terrorist attacks, their ability to pose some terrorist attacks in the neighboring countries, especially in Turkey. We have experienced a wave of terrorist attacks, but after the operations, the number has decreased totally. And nowadays we are not, thanks God, not experiencing such violence, has reduced. And they have also delegitimized. This is even though the drones seems escalatory at the first instance, at the first look, whenever we look at the outcomes, they are de-escalatory. They are de-escalating the terrorist organizations. The similar case also is applicable to Libya. At the conceptual level, even though the cases are quite different. In the Libyan case, Haftar forces, renegade general, whatever you call it, or warlord, which is tried to capture the capital, which is where the UN recognized government were established, and to control the country, creating de facto situation and to gain legitimacy. And by applying again drone warfare, but in that case, not directly, just provided the drones to the Libyan government, the situation on the ground has somehow shifted, reverted, and enabled the political process. And again, it is de-escalatory in nature, because at the end of the day, a political process could be initiated. And in terms of securitization, this is the most challenging part. We're still concentrating on this concept. Securitizing some issue, some threats is easier than to desecuritize. And for the time being, none of the cases has not been resolved. And what we can call, and our conclusion is, conceptually, actually, the drones are effective in terms of curbing the effects, assuming that the state actors or external support are involuntary or not voluntary enough to openly support. Because proxy warfare, in definition, is an indirect approach to attain some political objectives. but they refrain to jump over the threshold of war, and they prefer to stay backside. And we cannot observe directly point out each of them who is responsible, and they also refrain to make them explicit as well. But in any case, drone warfare at least are effective to curb the impacts of proxy warfare and paving some ground for political process. As in the Libyan case, we have observed with the general process, the political process has already started, and to a certain level, there are some achievements, at least some instability. We are not observing instability or irregular migration or atrocities on the ground, and people are talking with each other. However, does it mean desecuritization? Not yet. Or Daesh, is it completely eradicated? Not yet. We all know some sleeping cells are still existent in the Syrian and the Iraqi grounds. But at least they were degraded. I mean, there was a ground to resolve the problem. Our argument, basic argument, is drone warfare. Of course, it's a novel use, because traditionally the drones were used mostly for the target assassination and in support of the major operations. But what is novel, I mean, in Turkish military strategy was to integration of this equipments, capabilities with the new concepts in a sense of combined arms and use them at the front line of the action, well integrated. And this has contributed to constrain the conflicts, let's say, and enable the diplomacy or the political process. And basically, this concludes my presentation. If any question, I can delve into the details pending your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. Well, these remarks, all of them actually, do not allow me but to reiterate that they are thought-provoking, and I think I'm not mistaken if I would suggest that each and every topic that we have dealt with in this panel may become a subject for another special event. And which reminds me that, for instance, talking about the drones, Colonel, 2 months ago, the New Strategy Center hosted the second forum on unmanned platforms. So it was a 2-day forum, by the way. Dear friends, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we are in a bit of a problem. Our time has flown almost without having any feeling that it is passing, but it did. So it is preposterous for me to try and draw any conclusions. However, I would just recall that, you know, in the morning, Ambassador Kobler mentioned 8 factors that plague security in the Middle East. But if we take a step back, those factors are valid for other regions as well. Actually, most of them, if not all, ring a bell all over the world. And our distinguished panelists have added to the picture and rendered it even more complex. Therefore, I think we have a huge crop to think and to process from now on. I would also like to highlight a question that was shot on the chat. It is addressed to one of our distinguished panelists, to Professor Keser. So you are kindly asked to answer to that question, perhaps in writing, or in other ways that you might see fit. The more so as the question is available to everybody, you can read it on the chat, and the distinguished gentleman who put the question is a colleague of yours from your university. So I'm afraid that this brings me to the end of my task. I want to reiterate my personal gratitude. I have been privileged to listen to your remarks. I personally learned a lot, and I'd like to thank once again Seta and Dr. Aslan. Please help me and take over for the remainder of the day. A very good afternoon to you all. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We have only one panel left, but I would propose a 5 minutes break just to fix IT, the technical configurations, and then we will start. So we will start like 15:10. That means 5 minutes after.